Hello everyone, and welcome to my presentation. My name is James Williams. I am an adult with autism and a survivor of many GI and biomedical issues that a lot of people with autism experience on a daily basis. The title of my presentation today is Biomedical Issues from an Autistic Perspective. How do we experience them? In this presentation, I plan to talk about what it feels like to live with many biomedical and GI issues that people with autism face on a regular basis. So, I shall now continue by introducing myself a little more. My name is James Williams. I have autism. I am currently 32 years old. I've had a history of biomedical health issues, but I haven't always been open about these issues. In this presentation, I will talk about my personal experiences with biomedical issues, how I dealt with those issues and how they impacted my life, stories of others with autism I have met with biomedical issues, and finally, what compelled me to be open about biomedical issues, especially in a world and in a community such as the autism community where people aren't always able to be open about these issues due to our current political climate. Now, I want to give a disclaimer. This presentation is not an anti-vaccine or pro-vaccine presentation. We have to keep it in mind. The vaccine controversy has been a major obstacle for accurate research on biomedical issues and autism, but that doesn't mean that people with autism don't still endure biomedical issues. People with autism of all shapes and sizes struggle with GI issues and biomedical issues, regardless of the vaccine controversy. And sadly, due to an association of biomedical research and the vaccine controversy, a lot of important research that could help minimize the suffering of so many people with autism has been hampered. At the same time, not all GI and biomedical research is anti-vaccine, yet so many people make the stereotype that it is. This presentation is about my experiences living with biomedical issues and the experiences of other people I know. And personal stories are just as important as research, but it is our duty to not have political controversies get in the way of allowing people to share their stories. Because the fact is, regardless of whatever beliefs you have in our community regarding vaccines, there's a lot of research that shows that and suggests that people with autism have body differences, just as they have brain differences. The late Dr. Jeff Bradstreet, he discovered a lot of evidence showing that there are distinct medical ailments that he only could find in the bodies of kids with autism. Dina Gasner, a prominent self-advocate with the autism community, who isn't even often a part of the biomed community in autism, she's uncovered evidence showing that hormone levels routinely differ in the bodies of people with autism, which discusses the possibility that hormone poisoning can be a part of autism. And quite frankly, many people with autism often have greater behavioral issues when they don't feel well physically, along with many other people who aren't autistic too. Now, although we cannot ask the audience if this presentation was in person, I would have everybody raise their hand based on the following categories. Raise your hand if you're a parent who has a child who has endured any biomedical issues, such as impaired digestion, food allergies, or an impaired immune system. Raise your hand if you're a person with autism who's endured biomedical issues. Have you or any of your kids benefited from a special diet or any biomedical interventions such as probiotics or vitamin supplements? Now, I'm not going to say every child with autism has, but I myself benefited from these interventions, and I know other people with autism who have as well. Thus, pretty much suggesting the case that Autistic people don't just have differently wired brains, we've got differently wired bodies. And whether or not a immunization caused our autism probably doesn't change the fact that our bodies are wired differently and thus have different medical needs, and thus we with autism have unique experiences living with those needs that need to be addressed and discussed. Here's another case in point. 9 years ago in 2011, I made several visits to the Autism Oasis for Kids. It's a special school for kids with autism in Florida. The school's director prepared hot lunches herself that were gluten-free, casein-free, and vegetarian. And every student enrolled in her school was able to receive those adapted lunches. And the director told me that the students with autism who ate her lunches daily often showed improvement academically and behaviorally by eating those lunches. The physiological symptoms and biomedical issues with autism should not be ignored or dismissed. Indeed, I believe there's enough evidence out there suggesting that autism constitutes a physiological disorder just as it constitutes a mental disorder. And that biomedical issues and physiological symptoms are just as much a part of autism as are the social and sensory issues we tend to associate with autism. For this reason, I decided to start becoming vocal about biomedical issues with autism as a person who has endured many of these issues myself. Now, although PowerPoint said last year, I have actually been speaking openly about this subject now since 2013. My presentation begins and originated from the many years I have attended the Autism One conference. When I was at that conference, I was concerned by the lack of speakers with autism discussing their biomedical issues. I was also concerned by attempts to stereotype these issues as being the ramblings of incompetent doctors and or nutty anti-vaccine activists. Now, don't get me wrong. I loved and still enjoy every year the amazing presentations at Autism One by doctors I respect who are researching the issues of autism. However, I've always believed that it's important that just as doctors are sharing their research at those conferences, that people with autism need to talk about what it's like to live with those issues. Because one thing that I have shared with many of those doctors is that a doctor in a specific controlled setting can openly share their research, but they're often talking about health issues that people with autism have to live with in a social environment that often isn't always tolerant to them talking openly about those issues. I can tell you, when I was in high school, and I'll talk about this further in my presentation, I was often getting in trouble for talking too openly about my health issues. And I can tell you right now, I've benefited from many biomedical interventions myself, even those that have been dismissed as tomfoolery by other people. And I decided, after seeing how many other people with autism didn't want to speak at biomedical conferences because of their own misunderstandings of those conferences or their own personal preferences, I decided I wanted to change things. I wanted to share my story. And I have to thank many other individuals with autism out there, such as Ruth Snyder, who are also willing to come into the biomedical community to share their story as well. So with that, I shall now discuss my history. Growing up, I had many biomedical ailments. From 3 to 5, I endured a major sinus infection known as sinusitis from age 3 to 5. From age 5 to 7, I endured frequent headaches. I suffered from 2 eyes that could not team or work together and underwent intensive eye therapy around the same time. I endured routine feelings of soreness in my feet and couldn't walk longer than 2 blocks as a kid without pain and exhaustion. I was unable to keep my head straight while walking. I had multiple cuts to my chin as a young child. And I endured several freak nosebleeds in the middle of the night at age 7. Many doctors were unable to diagnose the cause of these ailments at first. Finally, some of them were diagnosed and treated. The sinusitis was caused by enlarged adenoids in my nose, and I received a major adenoidectomy when I was 5. The headaches were caused by an unknown allergy to gluten. After cutting out gluten at the age of 7, my headaches finally disappeared, and I have been gluten-free for the rest of my life. To this day, I endure major physical ailments if I eat gluten, unless I take a medication that I now take on a regular basis so that I can eat gluten at times and not get sick, which can range from chills, headaches, hot flashes, a sore throat and runny nose, physical soreness, and diarrhea. Freak nosebleeds were never diagnosed. The foot soreness was due to a combination of low muscle tone and improperly jointed feet. Thus, I underwent extensive occupational and physical therapy as a child and wore orthotics in my shoes for over 10 years. Today, I routinely walk up to 3 to 4 miles at a time without feeling pain. In contrast to when I was a kid, when I was only able to walk 1 to 2 blocks. Improper walking posture was due to curves in my spine and developing scoliosis, and I underwent extensive chiropractic treatments for over 6 years. Now my spine is straight. The chin cuts were due to issues with balance that often caused me to have falls while running or walking. The important thing to remember, though, all of these issues happen concurrently with many mental issues of autism. I still have the same sensory and social and behavioral issues people associate with autism alongside these biomedical issues. And sometimes those other issues cause me struggles. I often struggle with communicating these issues to other people due to limited verbal abilities and sometimes due to not being able to know where and when to talk, out of fear of being misunderstood or disciplined. I often wondered if these experiences were unique to me, or if this was just the reality of childhood or what kids went through, since I wasn't fully aware of my autism until the age of 8. I spent many hours trying to focus on how to endure the pain I was going through. But, an important reminder to everyone, I did not spend much time thinking whether or not these issues were caused by vaccinations. During this time, I endured many cycles of being unable to regulate meals and digestion. One part of my life, I routinely stuffed myself at meals, unable to entirely know when I was full. I often felt intense hunger, even after a large meal. I mean, there would be times when I would stuff myself, and then 5 minutes later, I'd feel hungry again. And I had this constant need to eat. No diagnosis was ever given for this, and this continued until my immune system and digestive system collapsed between the ages of 11 and 12, and I almost starved to death. When I was 11 years old, I had an extremely stressful experience in the 5th grade, where I was never able to feel calm in school. And one thing I will tell you right now, a lot of people, when they think of struggles kids with autism face in school, they think bullying, homework, note-taking. But in all honesty, the thing I had the hardest struggle with was neither of those. It was fire drills and their cousin, tornado drills. When I was a kid, the fire alarm was so painful for me that I lived in fear of when that fire alarm was going to go off. And the principal told me, she'd tell me before the drills, told me once, didn't tell me again. Actually tricked me into admitting I didn't need to be told when a fire drill was. This is why whenever I give presentations to teachers, I tell them, as much as you possibly can, you have to tell kids with autism before any drill, whether it's a fire drill, a lockdown drill, a tornado drill, an active shooter drill, any emergency drill, you have to tell them. And contrary to what you might think, you're not going to stop them from being prepared for the real thing if you tell them before a drill. But that's another story. But what I will tell you is, during that time, I suffered periodic bouts of stomach flu and abdominal pain during the year. And it got so bad that my parents decided after the 5th grade they were going to homeschool me. And after I finished the 5th grade, I was so happy to be freed from school until less than 2 weeks later, I woke up with horrible abdominal pain. It was just excruciating as ever. And what's amazing is I'd suffered these periodic bouts of stomach flu and pain, but I just woke up and was just miserable. I felt horrible. And I started feeling abdominal pain after every meal and gradually just lost my ability to eat normally. Doctors were unable to accurately find a cause of this ailment, and no interventions seemed to be working at first. Sometimes they made it worse. As an example, one doctor recommended Zantac, thinking I just had bad reflux, and that made the pain horrible. I gradually became unable to tolerate solid food and lived on liquid meal replacements for nearly 6 months. Blood tests showed an autoimmune collapse, high levels of mercury, and an impaired digestive system, yet many conventional doctors were interpreting the tests as showing I had nothing wrong. I lost 35 pounds in the process. Now, interestingly enough, although the conventional doctors interpreted the tests as showing I had nothing wrong, I actually showed those same blood tests to a MAPS doctor, the late Dr. John Hicks, and he took the same test that a standard pediatrician had said, "Oh, there's nothing wrong with James," and interpreted as, "Oh, he has this immune collapse. He has this high levels of mercury. There's this immune collapse and digestive system." And it was he who actually, I correct myself, it was he who gave me the high levels, the heavy metals test, which showed I had high levels of mercury. But either way, while the conventional doctor didn't see the immune collapse and the digestive impairments, the MAPS doctor, Dr. John Hicks, did. Although my abdominal pain eventually started fading, I started losing my desire to recover and started enjoying being sick. Now, what I mean by this is that, a lot of people with autism are very much routine people. And eventually, as I lost my ability to eat, it was getting harder to get back on the regular schedule of eating. And this caused a huge conflict in my family because I often was force-fed in an attempt to stay alive, resulting in a war zone between me and my parents. I started actually hearing schizophrenic-like voices in my brain, in fact, due to malnourishment and starvation. My parents actually named one of them Chesterfield. We named one of them Chesterfield after a old cigarette commercial, the Chesterfield cigarette commercial, because that to us represented something evil, since Chesterfield cigarettes were dangerous. And that was one way that my parents and I tried to help me process these voices I was hearing. I endured major appetite loss even after my abdominal pain faded after meals. I also started doing respiratory attacks after certain movements as well. I joined a Buddhist temple during this time and tried to use meditation temporarily to help clear my mind, but this eventually didn't work for me. In fact, I actually had to leave early a meditation service because eventually the schizophrenia and the issues got too powerful. I underwent drama therapy to help deal with some of my past autism-related traumas. An endoscopy showed signs of acid reflux disease. And I was almost on the verge of death until a turning point emerged 6 months after my collapse. During this turning point, I started sessions of acupuncture, which gradually impaired digestive abilities. I discovered some of my abdominal pain could be resolved by drinking hot tea during meals, along with ice cream. And I gradually started eating soups to improve digestion. These remedies, however, were not totally sufficient, however, as I still endured a total appetite loss and had lost the will to eat. And I often viewed eating and drinking as a chore. The final remedy, however, that caused a full recovery from my autoimmune collapse was taking zinc supplements. After zinc supplements, my appetite loss ended, and I was transformed into a person who actually now felt hungry for the first time in months and was willing to eat and recover from my ailment. And one thing I learned about those zinc supplements is that while it was very easy for my parents to blame me for not wanting to eat and not having an appetite, that appetite loss was just as much a product of the mineral deficiencies and the autoimmune collapse as was being unable to digest solid food. 2 weeks after taking zinc supplements, I had fully recovered from my autoimmune collapse. I was eating normally and had regained digestive abilities. My respiratory ailments and schizophrenic voices soon cleared up afterwards. And by the time of my recovery, I had been ill for a little over 9 months, however. During those 9 months, I had to live on liquid meal replacements for nearly 6 months. I'd lost 35 pounds and almost starved to death. Now, some things had not recovered. I still suffer from acid reflux disease to this day. But what I've learned now is that my acid reflux is low acid reflux, not high acid reflux, which is why many of the remedies those doctors had recommended before were, in fact, making things worse. In addition, I still have gluten allergies. Actually, to clarify, I had a strictly wheat allergy before I had my autoimmune collapse, and now I have a full-blown gluten allergy. However, thanks to the successful creation of the trienza enzymes by Dr. Devin Houston, if I take those, I can eat gluten periodically and not get sick or as sick as I usually would. I've also had many more issues since then, but that's really all the time I have to talk about them now. So, why did I decide to become vocal about biomedical issues? For many years, I was very quiet about what I'd gone through. During adolescence, I wrote several novels, and I spoke more about social and educational issues about autism. I established myself as an author and presenter, and have spoken at conferences all around the United States. But during my travels around the United States, even at conferences where not a lot of people talked about these issues, I started hearing stories from people with autism and their families about their biomedical issues. Here are some examples. I have a good friend with autism who endures routine attacks of nausea that sometimes made her unable to attend work or school. At a summer camp for individuals with autism, I worked with a girl with autism who had major digestive issues that she called her tummy problems, and the other staff didn't always understand her issues. I met a family with a young boy with autism who has a weakened immune system and has often been unable to attend school due to his physical ailments. After hearing these stories and many more, I realized that since I had endured many biomedical issues myself, it was time for me to speak out about them. I have also met many doctors, such as Dr. Jeff Bradstreet and Dr. John Hicks, who have been impressed at my ability to articulate my story with others. Indeed, I'll never forget after Dr. Hicks treated me as a patient as a kid, getting to see him as an adult at Autism 1, after starting to tell my story at that conference and in many other settings. At the same time, I also felt upset that there were not a lot of people with autism talking about their biomedical issues. Although I respect a lot of self-advocates with autism who are telling their stories, I personally have never shared the belief that, people with autism shouldn't come to biomedical conferences because everyone in the biomed community is all for curing autism. Well, I can tell you right now, I'm never going to say that I've been cured of my autism. I will say, however, that I've been cured of many biomedical issues. And I think it's sad that a lot of people with autism often choose not to become part of the biomed community because they associate that community with curing autism, when there's a lot more to our community than just fighting about whether or not autism should be cured. But with that, I am going to share the following advice for anyone, whether you're a parent of a child with autism enduring biomedical issues, or if you're someone who wants to help an autistic person endure biomedical issues. Be aware that many of us are not always unable to understand the science of our ailments, but we still suffer and feel the pain. Autistic people aren't always focusing on whether or not vaccinations cause their ailments, and the vaccine debate should never distract people or get in the way of helping autistic kids who are chronically ill. Some children with autism may not be fully aware of what it means to not be sick, since many of them have been ill a lot of their lives and may resist attempts to recovery because they may see it as an unknown change to them. This is something that people have to remember. If you live most of your life not feeling sick, it's very easy for you to be able to say, this is me being sick, and this is me when I'm well. But for many kids with autism and many autistic people of all ages, feeling somewhat sick is their norm. Indeed, during the COVID-19 pandemic, I have a lot of friends with autism that we've chatted on various virtual platforms where we talk about the irony that, they say don't go into certain public places if you're experiencing these symptoms, when many autistic people experience many symptoms of COVID on a regular basis, but due to biomedical issues that aren't contagious and don't usually infect anybody. And regardless of whether or not we're in a pandemic or not, it can be very difficult when you feel sick the majority of your waking hours and you're being told by a doctor that something may enable you to recover. So please keep that in consideration when you're a parent helping a child with autism suffering from biomed issues. And finally, safe zones need to be provided for autistic people to openly share their issues with people they feel comfortable talking to. They should be allowed to talk to people they are comfortable sharing with. And there are many times when you're autistic, especially in school, when you're told by a professional that you need to talk to so-and-so because that's a safe person, when you personally don't feel comfortable talking to them. Autistic people need to have the right to determine whom they are comfortable talking to. And professionals and others need to respect those choices. In addition, many social rules in society make many topics about health inappropriate subjects to talk about. And many autistic people have been hurt in their attempts to communicate their problems with others because many authority figures and people have told them, it's inappropriate to talk about your health issues in this setting. I will never forget when I was working at a summer camp with autism, and there was a camper with autism who, like the camper I mentioned earlier, had really nasty GI issues. Yet their counselors are routinely telling them, you can't talk about GI issues here. It's not appropriate in this camp setting. Yet this was an autism camp. We need to find ways to help autistic people speak openly about their health issues in safe settings where we don't tell them it's inappropriate. When I was in high school, I had lots of friends who endured health issues. Some had autism. One of them had cancer. Others had many other issues. And we often felt frustrated that they couldn't speak openly in many social situations when they needed to about their problems. My friends and I created safe social groups where we had the right to be open. We need to create these places for kids with biomedical issues. One example that I often give, when I was in high school, one really significant health issue that a lot of my female friends with autism and autistic tendencies had is that their symptoms often magnified before or during their period. And of course, in society, we don't often allow females to talk openly about their periods. And many of my female friends, their periods caused them so many health problems. I mean, they would go under such pain. There was one girl I knew who had low muscle tone from the get-go due to her autism, and that got so much worse she couldn't even walk normally before or during her period. And menstruation was this huge issue that a lot of my female friends struggled with. And my female friends and I really talked a lot about the frustration they felt that society wasn't letting them talk openly to people about these horrible ailments they were going through. Another thing my female friends and I talked about is the fact that because autism is more openly diagnosed, whether or not it actually affects more males, it's more openly diagnosed in males. Thus, a lot of my female friends with autism told me that they had more friends who were male because that had autism or other disabilities than other friends who were typical females, and often were in situations where they wanted to talk openly to trusted male friends with disabilities about their menstrual issues. And I think about how when I was in high school, I told my female friends, if you want to talk to me about a menstrual issue, I don't care. Because of my autism, unlike other guys, it doesn't make me uncomfortable. You can talk to me all you want about your menstrual issues. In return, let me talk to you about my GI issues and my health issues. Indeed, I maintain many friendships based on that agreement. You let me talk to you about the health issues society won't let me talk about, and I'll let you talk to me about the health issues society won't let you talk about. Because in the end, biomedical issues are real. They are not just the ramblings of quacks or crazy autism moms. And it is my hope that more autistic people in the future can be vocal about their biomedical experiences. My hope is that in this presentation, I have given a voice to others with autism who have not been able to communicate these issues. My hope is that by sharing this presentation to you, I have been able to speak up for other people with autism, whether they're children, whether they're teenagers, whatever age they are, who have endured many of these biomedical issues. Indeed, when I first gave this presentation about 7 years ago at a conference, the audience wasn't just parents of kids with autism. It was of older adults with autism. Many in middle age, sometimes nearing old age, their 40s, 50s, and 60s. I let them speak about their stories. What was amazing was that although these individuals with autism were much older than me, right now I'm in my early 30s, and back then I was in my mid-20s, they shared that when they were children, 40, 50, 60 years ago, they experienced some of the same biomedical and GI issues that kids are going through today, at a time when Not even a single doctor or professional rarely even knew what was going on. Ruth Snyder, whom I sometimes give this presentation with, she talks about when she shares her story, how many times she had many biomedical issues related to her autism, where doctors would either misdiagnose what she had or just assume it was all in her head. Let's stop thinking of biomedical issues as being separate from autism, unless they are, and start realizing that biomedical issues are just as much a part of autism as our sensory issues, social issues, and emotional issues. Indeed, my mother always told me growing up, the ability to communicate your needs honestly is the best way for people to understand what you are feeling and going through. I was a late talker. It took me 2 years to learn how to talk. It was a 2-year process from age 4 to age 6. Several things that helped me learn how to communicate and develop language were speech therapy and auditory integration training, but also intense one-on-one conversations between myself and my parents. My father, who at the time worked in computers, gave me a lot of computers that I could use growing up, where I would learn how to read and write with the computer. Indeed, I was able to read before I could fluently talk. I was able to type on a computer before I could fully talk. But my mother always said, the most important thing you're going to need in this world is to communicate. And I'll never forget how upset I felt when I was in high school and I became a teenager and puberty hit. And suddenly people were saying, you can't talk about this. You can't talk about that. And my female friends with autism were having their issues related to adolescence, and people were telling them you can't talk about this and that. And I said to myself, I was told as a kid the importance of communication. Why is society stopping all these important communications? And that's why I decided it was important for me to speak up. It was important for me to share that story, the story of what it's like to live with those issues. Because I can tell you, it's not easy when you're a kid with autism and you find out you have a food allergy. I was a picky eater. It was hard for me to cut out gluten when I was a kid. This is why I tell parents, don't make a child cut out a food unless they are actually allergic to it. And under no circumstances should parents force siblings who don't have allergies to cut out foods to show respect for their sibling with autism. What it does is just trigger resentment towards their sibling with autism. One thing I've always told my parents, I have a gluten allergy. I don't care if you eat gluten in front of me. You can eat whatever you want, because I want to respect your food issues if you respect mine. One other thing that I think people have to remember too is that even when a doctor can tell you, even if it's an amazing maths doctor, when a doctor tells you what's wrong with your child, it can be the best thing in the world. But when your child lives with those issues, he or she is not only experiencing the pain of those issues, whether or not they're experiencing them with a lot of sensory or social issues, whether or not they're experiencing them with various other identity issues, whether they're a he, a she, a it, or whatever pronouns children want to identify themselves. No one lives with their health issues in a vacuum. It's like the old saying, no man is an island. Everybody lives with their health issues in the context of a society and a community. The social rules that society gives us that tells us how we have to manage those rules can have just as much a powerful impact on autistic people as the pain and the health issues themselves. One of the biggest frustrations I endure on a regular basis is not just living with the biomedical issues of autism, but being routinely unable to talk openly about those issues due to societal rules telling me they're not always appropriate. And the reality is, there are many symptoms of autism and many behaviors that society deems appropriate, that a lot of research has told us are related to health issues and health needs. For example, a lot of autistic people have been disciplined for stimming, which refers to body motions that are considered inappropriate, like arm flapping or head itching. Yet so much research tells us that stimming is essential for a lot of health regulation within the bodies of autistic people. It's often related to the need to release extra energy that autistic people are producing due to higher stress levels. Although a lot of people at one time associated autism with personal space issues and autistic people not liking to be touched, we now know that there's a subgroup of people with autism who really want personal space, but there's another subgroup that craves touch, that hugs everybody indiscriminately, that needs those hugs in order to have certain health functions occur. Yet we live in a society that often restricts when you can and can't hug people, especially now with the COVID-19 pandemic really restricting who people can and can't hug. I mean, I am going to honestly say I know many adults with autism who have had to hug each other, even during the pandemic, because their bodies have gotten so out of balance due to the loss of hugging during the pandemic. Because the risk of their health imbalances due to the hugs became so bad that to them, it was better for them to risk hugging than to not hug. And that's one thing I'm going to close specific to the pandemic. A lot of people in our legislature have tried to make restrictions to help prevent the spread of the COVID-19 virus. But what they fail to realize is that many of those restrictions can also result in health issues as well, especially for people with autism. I know autistic people who have gotten COVID, but I also know autistic people who have suffered major health issues due to the restrictions of the lockdown. Indeed, I know many autistic people who have brutally honestly said, for some of us, society's prescribed cure of lockdown due to COVID can be just as bad as getting COVID. Indeed, the cure can sometimes be worse than the disease. And my autistic friends who are saying this aren't trying to say this for political gain. They're just speaking up for themselves. With that, I will now formally close my session. I want to thank you all for listening to my presentation today. Although I cannot answer any questions in this virtual format, anyone who wants to ask any questions regarding what they heard today, you may feel free to email me at my email, jmw820@comcast.net. That's 820 with a number, not H20. You can also look at my website, jamesmw.com, where I have many archived presentations that anyone can read, and links to my books for purchase. I also want to give a disclaimer before I go. During my presentation, I rotated between person first and identity first language. Sometimes I referred to people with autism as people with autism. Sometimes I referred to people with autism as autistic people. I did this for a reason. Some autistic people prefer to be called autistic people. They don't see their autism as separate from their personhood. However, many parents and teachers and professionals have been told they need to refer to autistic people as people with autism. If I simply refer to autistic people as people with autism, I've learned that I will offend some people. If I, on the other hand, however, just refer to people with autism as autistic people, I will offend them as well. If I use just one terminology, someone will be offended. Thus, I chose to use both terms in order to show that I am personally neutral regarding what language to be shared, because both forms of referring to people with autism and autistic people are correct in certain settings, and therefore I wanted to acknowledge both preferences. Thus, I use those terms interchangeably for that reason, and do so in most of my presentations. With that, I bid thee farewell. Have an amazing rest of your time at Virtual TACA, and hopefully, when everything clears up, I look forward to seeing everyone in person at another TACA conference. Have an amazing day.